Xabi Alonso's job is in danger after just 6 months at Real Madrid. So what's gone wrong? And could he be a better fit at Liverpool? Well, to delve into it on today's show, brought to you by BOYLE Sports, we've got JJ Bull. We've also got John Mackenzie. Okay, let's do the journalistic bit and clarify a few things. So, as reported by James Pearce on The Athletic, Arne Slot retains the support of the Liverpool board, but he doesn't have endless credit in the bank. So given that and their form this season, we thought we'd do a little bit of an experiment and hypothetically see what they might look like under someone like Xabi Alonso. So let's start with Real Madrid. Let's go back a little bit because currently they are second in La Liga. I think they're 4 points behind Barcelona at the time of recording, but his job's in danger?
Well, it was going very well at the start until it wasn't. The problem with being the Real Madrid manager is that you cannot lose a game. It's very important.
Okay, I hear you.
They won the first 7 games in a row. Alonso was trying some different shapes out, putting some things in. But then Atletico Madrid came along and did them in 5-2. You remember when I said you can't lose a single game as Real Madrid manager?
Okay.
You definitely can't lose.
Against your rivals.
Exactly. Anyway, then they went and won 6 in a row, including a win over Barcelona. But then they lost to Liverpool, who we're talking about, obviously, and have only won 1 in 5 La Liga games since.
All right.
And the thing is, underlying numbers look pretty good. Towards the end of last season, you see that their expected goals against starts to rise. But then Alonso comes in, everything looks decent. And then there's some caveats. He's got a lot of change of players. So Modric and Kroos leaving is massive. Alexander-Arnold, Mastantuono, Carreras, Huijsen, some of the players that have come in. So it's quite a lot of changes going on. But the real problem they've had is the players they've had available because, as you can see, the peak players here play most of the minutes. There's a lot of players missing out, specifically because of injuries. And injuries to centre-backs and right-backs. So their defence has been decimated by different injuries. Bit of ill discipline's crept in as well, which is something that won't look good to people looking at Alonso and his control over the dressing room too. But the real issues, as ever at Real Madrid, have been the battle between individual players and the system.
Yes.
Or more specifically, the manager. We've seen this before. But what Alonso is doing is he wants to make sure that they're pressing and trying to win the ball back. A crazy endeavour. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought, eh?
I don't know. But you see, he is doing it a lot. But just because you're doing it a lot doesn't mean you're good at it.
All right.
Like you in skateboarding.
You've seen me skateboard?
Yes. Now, Carlo Ancelotti was obviously, he's the best, right? So there's a quote from him. He says, "A good coach is one who adapts the game to the player's characteristics. If I have Ronaldo up front, I study how to get him the ball often. I don't ask him to tire himself out by running back. There are 2 types of players, those who make the difference and those who run." Xabi Alonso seems to know this. So in a quote from him in The Athletic, he said, "Managing personalities, getting the best out of the players, making them feel as good as possible, is as important as the footballing philosophy, the tactical work, the physical work." So Alonso is not unaware of this. But there are things we see when we see Real Madrid play where what he wants to put in place, they're trying to do it, but maybe not executing it just as well. So this is an example of what to look at. So this is I think it's Fran Garcia on the ball here on the left. But what's really important to look at here, if you'll observe closely, is there are 2 players telling him to do 2 very different things.
One wants to go spot.
But one's looking forward, one's looking back. So Fran Garcia's got to make a decision. Now Bellingham wins the battle here and gets the ball in behind. But what I'm trying to show here is that when Bellingham loses the ball, what Alonso wants him to do, as Ancelotti has in the past, he wants him to try and counter-press and win the ball high up the pitch. And they jump on it, but they don't get it, and Celta Vigo play out, so they manage to get through. But what then happens is because Real Madrid, the way they're playing, they're trying to push over to one side, they can be dragged to one side really tight. So when Celta Vigo win the ball back, they can easily switch it out to the side. So Real Madrid then have to come all the way up to the other side here. They're too slow. They're not fast enough to do it. Other holes start showing up, so you can just ping the ball through other spaces. And then Celta Vigo can play all the way through, nice and easy, 1-touch, 2-touch passes, and you get 3v3 in the last line. They don't score here, but this is the kind of thing that happens. Here's an example of them not putting the pressure on at all. So this is Miguel Roman playing for Celta Vigo. This is the hero of the hour. I want you to look at here is also the time, because Miguel Roman has the ball here, and he has the ball here, and he has the ball here, and it's about 7 or 8 seconds have gone by. Where not a single player has put pressure on him. Not Vinicius Jr., not Mbappe. And this happened after they'd already scored with a similar situation. There's Miguel Roman on the ball again, Vinicius Jr. closing him down, Mbappe not doing anything there. But what's really interesting I found is that the players know about it. Tchouameni before the Man City game said, against Celta, of course, in reference to whether they lack intensity. And in other games too, if we don't play with maximum intensity, it's going to be very difficult to win games. But he's one of them. This is the thing, these players talk about intensity. And so it seems like a lot has gone wrong for Real Madrid ever since Vinicius Jr. was taken off as a substitute against Barcelona. You may recall him coming off.
Yes, and he had a few words to say.
He's very, very upset. He said, always me, I'm leaving the team. It's better if I leave, I'm leaving. I'm going to run away. They were holding on to a lead against Barcelona. I think they put Rodrigo on, who's better defensively. So they're trying to solidify it because you can't rely on Vinicius Jr. down that wing to defend. He doesn't put pressures, you've seen it. And so what you've ended up with is Xabi Alonso trying to manage players who have massive egos, as we've always known. But like Vinicius Junior, for example, this is from The Athletic, has at least 25 staff, including a manager, 2 assistant managers, a social media manager. It's like you.
I mean, you don't need to let them know, but yes.
There we go.
Me and Vinny are very alike.
It's like trying to manage a company on the pitch. Is this what it's like, though?
It's true. That's huge. That is huge. But very different to the kind of personnel who would have managed at Leverkusen, for instance.
And as we know, the only manager who can manage a company on the pitch is Pep Guardiola, right? Because he had him for many years.
Exactly. And so what we've ended up with Real Madrid is that Xabi Alonso has 2 players who want to be in the same position, really, Mbappe and Vinicius Junior. It's a problem. You've got players who are aware of the lack of intensity, but also are showing the lack of intensity, then saying they're aware of a lack of intensity. The system is kind of the star, but the players don't really fit into it, especially. And there's an awful lot of things here which sound quite a lot like Liverpool.
What then makes you think Alonso would be a great fit for a team like Liverpool?
Well, Xabi Alonso has a great record as a manager.
Yeah.
It's important not to forget that. And I think that what we need to do is we need to talk about the way that he has platformed players in the past, because it's interesting hearing JJ give that Carlo Ancelotti quote where he says you've got to use the players in the way that is best for them. The 23-24 season for Leverkusen was a season where, I mean, it was great. I've had great fun in the last couple of days because I've been watching a lot of those games back.
Brilliant.
It was such a fun team to watch, and I think the reason is because he got the players playing in a way that was best for them. We have players like Florian Wirtz, who's struggling at Liverpool, but in this system, he thrived. He thrived.
Thrived? Is that what?
Yeah, maybe.
Take it.
When we talk about platforming, I think it's interesting hearing Ancelotti label individuals, I think, because it's easy for us to think what you've got to do is just get the player doing the things that are best for them. But I think a lot of what platforming is about making sure you've got the right dynamics with their teammates around them. And what is management other than getting the players on the pitch with the right players around them to get the most out of everyone involved? And I think that's what we saw in that 23-24 Leverkusen season, because Wirtz and Frimpong were already at Leverkusen at this point in time. But in that summer, the summer of 23, they signed 4 players, these 4 players here, Grimaldo, Xhaka, Victor Boniface and Jonas Hoffmann. What these guys did is that they brought, I think, a raised level of dynamics with some of the players, which not only got the most out of them, but also allowed them to get the most out of other players around them, right? So Grimaldo operating on the same side as Florian Wirtz. These are 2 of the smartest footballers you'll see. And if you have a player like Wirtz who you're going to let float around and dictate a lot of the play, then having a player like Grimaldo who can recognise where Wirtz is and respond to that, really important. Same is true on the other side. So you've got Hoffmann nominally playing as like an outside forward, but actually spending a lot of time dropping in, helping out in midfield, and then opening out this space for Frimpong to play in. And then in the back line as well. So if you've got Frimpong pushing forward, you can use someone like Odion Kusunu as a bit more of a fullback in that situation, shift everyone around and have Grimaldo not getting too far forward. So again, you've got like rest defence ideas there as well. But I think this is what happened so well in that 23-24 season. They suddenly have players who are able to get more out of the team than they had before. They're able to platform themselves, but everyone else around them. Granit Xhaka, incredibly important in this team, for example, because what Alonso wants to do is build up from the back, force the opponent into their own half, and then they would end up with these sorts of situations where you've got the 2 midfielders, so we've got Palacios and Xhaka here. Your back 3 can become a back 2 if you want, right? Because you can push Kusunu up. If you've only got 1 player pressing, you don't need to have 3 players on it, so you can move Kusunu around. But then what you're doing is you're doing 2 things. You keep your midfielders quite high, so Xhaka and Palacios, these players are able to keep the ball. And then what you want is you want Boniface, you want Frimpong, maybe Grimaldo to force the opposition back line deeper. And so what you then end up with is the opposition midfield line wanting to push up on Xhaka and Palacios, and then the front line for Leverkusen forcing the opposition back line deeper. And then you're opening out space in the middle. And this is why you then start getting Wirtz platformed in a really nice way, because what you get with Wirtz is the ability to drift in between the lines. Same with Hoffmann. These 2 players just moving in between the lines, and what they're trying to do then is open out this space in the middle, find the ball through to them, and then turn and attack. So what this is just basically a really nice way of progressing the ball down the field, but then when the opponent is starting to form a block, having ways of just pulling that block apart and finding space in between and generating chances. I've just got one example of that on the pitch, just so you can see what it looks like. This is Leverkusen playing against Mainz. They're playing from right to left here. And what you can see is what I'm talking about here, right? So you've got your 2 centre-backs here in Tapsoba and Jonathan Tah. Kusunu has pushed up to try and pull out some of the opposition midfielders. The opposition are in quite a nice block. you've got your two central midfielders. This is Robert Andrich and Xhaka here. You can see they're trying to pull that midfield line forward, and then you've got the players pinning the opposition back line back. So you've got Frimpong high up the pitch. The fullback has to cover him. We've got, I think this is Amin Adli here. He's occupying two of the centre backs. And then you can see, here's Wirtz, here's Jonas Hoffmann, and you can see what they're trying to do is get in between the lines.
Okay.
And what they're going to try and do from here is pull around this opposition block. And they do this often by just playing lots of bounce passes. Some of those bounce passes will often look nonsensical, right? They'll play the ball to someone under pressure, and you think, well, you're not going to get any ball progression or any benefit from that. But what ends up happening is because they're moving the ball around so quickly, the structure gets pulled apart. So really nice example of it here, because Andrich plays the ball to Xhaka, who bounce passes it immediately into Wirtz, who's under a lot of pressure. The centre-back is going to step up here. But if we look at the defensive structure here, you can see this is actually not bad for Mainz, the opposition team. By the time that the ball is received by Wirtz and he bounces it back out into this area because he's under so much pressure. But now look at the defensive structure, it's been pulled apart. And this is the basis of what they're trying to do. They're trying to have these plays where they'll attempt to pull the structure apart. If it doesn't work out, and they reset and do it again. In this instance, if Wirtz receives the ball, he could actually turn out and find Hoffmann between the lines here. That's a really nice chance. Doesn't open up in this situation, and instead they work it around. And we end up in a very similar situation, right? And in this instance, actually what happens is that Tapsoba plays a bounce pass into Xhaka, pulls the midfielders out, and again, you're creating that space between the lines. And as a result, Tapsoba can then find this pass into Hoffmann between the lines. And now you have this situation where they've created a really dangerous scenario just by being patient, moving the ball around, sometimes having these quick changes of tempo, which don't result in anything, moving it back, starting again, and getting the ball through. But as you can see, I think it's really clear from this why someone like Florian Wirtz might be so dangerous in this system, because I always talk about him as being a high volume touch guy, right? And he wants to do all that in the final third. He wants to be a facilitator for his teammates. So he's constantly moving, constantly finding space, constantly making quick passes to pull that structure apart. But then he has the ability to be super creative when he receives the balls in these kinds of scenarios, and can play into that space behind as well. So I think part of the reason why we're talking about Xabi Alonso at Liverpool is because I think what Slot hasn't managed to do is platform Wirtz in a way that really suits him. So with Slot, we talked about it already in a show we did back in September, where we talked about whether or not we should be worried about Liverpool. And we talked then about how what Wirtz was being expected to do was operate in very different areas. Liverpool often playing quite dynamically, playing quite quick, starting from the back and then having these tempo shifts and going forward very quickly. In those sorts of situations, you're not getting the most out of Wirtz. And so I guess the big question is, if someone like Alonso went to Liverpool, would he be able to get something out of Wirtz?
That's not a bad shout. Is Alonso more of a coach than a manager in many respects? We talk about what's happening at Real Madrid right now, managing a lot of things, but actually a lot of the things you guys are talking about are his coaching abilities to get the best out of certain players and put them in particular scenarios. Yeah,
I think that's a really good question, because I think you need to make a distinction between certain types of footballer, because Florian Wirtz is like a superstar. He's one of the most expensive players in the Premier League, in Premier League history. The difference, I think, with someone like Wirtz, with someone like some of the players that Real Madrid have, is that Wirtz has come through, I think, a system where they're expected to take on board tactical details. They're expected to be part of a broader structure, and he's quite happy taking that. And I think with Alonso at Leverkusen, obviously it's a much lower kind of level of elite player. It's still elite players. But because that team were winning, that team were willing to put in the tactical details and the hard work. That hasn't worked out quite so well for Alonso at Real Madrid. You've got a bunch of players there who've not played in a particularly intense pressing style for years and years and years, and then you're expecting them to sort of flip a switch and become a lot more sort of instinctive pressers. It's not going to happen. But if Alonso goes to Liverpool, they've been doing that for years. They've been the pressing team for years. So I think it's those kind of ideas, right, where I think the difference of man management, I think, makes a difference to the way that he'll be able to coach. But yeah, I think that only time will tell how well Alonso will be able to do that in the future.
Okay, I want us to talk about Liverpool a little bit more later on, but Liverpool was showing a bit more promise at the moment and consistency in the Premier League. Another team that's doing the same, actually, is Aston Villa. Here's Sam Tighe to tell us why.
Welcome to What's Changed, presented by BOYLE Sports. Aston Villa failed to win any of their first 5 league games this season and scored just 1 goal. Now they've won 9 of their last 10 and sit 3rd in the table, having just beaten Arsenal. So, what's changed? It was a difficult summer transfer window for Villa, whose spending ability was restrained. Then things got worse as key attackers Ollie Watkins and Morgan Rogers started the season in terrible form. The team looked broken. But things changed when centre-back Pau Torres returned to the lineup. His passing ability helped retain the ball and find attackers in better positions. Then, Villa started scoring, but remarkably, most of their goals came from range. Emery hinted that the squad had been practicing this as a way to beat low blocks, but it still attracted questions over how sustainable it was. Now, Villa have started making better quality chances, helped by creative midfielder Youri Tielemans returning from injury. Their 2.1 XG against Arsenal, the most the Gunners have conceded all season, was the sign of an excellent team. And now the question has changed from could they go down to can they get back into the Champions League?
I mean, Liverpool have got quite a few issues at the moment. Should they be trying to get a lot more out of Florian Wirtz, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear JJ's opinion on this, because for me, everyone's going to talk about the big signings they've made. You've got Isak not really firing. Ekitike has been playing pretty well, but the feeling is you can still get more out of him. You've got all of the issues surrounding Salah. For me, the big issue for Liverpool is that they've got one of the most creative players in world football, and so it seems to me that if you can sort out a way of getting Wirtz to be well platformed, as we keep saying, then it's going to bring more out of Isak and Ekitike. It's going to solve the issue of someone like Mohamed Salah, because Salah is not just a source of goals for Liverpool last season in terms of directly scoring them, he was setting up a lot of goals as well. So I guess for me, the big question would be, is Alonso if he came, would he take Wirtz, make him the beating heart of that team, and how would he do it? And would that then solve a lot of the problems that we talked about with Slot this season of not being able to fit these elite players in?
Well, I think you could look at how you would build it on the pitch. So if you're the manager, like what you want to look at. So if you think you're going to build around Wirtz, like John's saying, you want to try and get him in these positions where he can float around, so you need that. But to allow him to float off probably the left-hand side, you need someone to give him width that side there, which means you're probably not going to play him as the left winger, you're probably going to play him inside, which means you probably need someone up top next to him. So you put a striker, so maybe put Ekitike there. So then your width would probably come from a fullback, you'd think, which is why Kerkez makes perfect sense. Obviously, then you need like a centre back or two, so we'll put one in there and the Kanate goes in there. Then you need to have your right hand side, so you need Salah. Where's he going to go? Salah's probably going to go over sort of
his
here.
natural position, yeah.
But then straight away, because these are going to fill in like a 2 here, really, which means that Salah players to stay wider. So maybe that's not ideal. So maybe then you want someone who can overlap on the right to give you width on the right-hand side, like Frimpong was doing.
Frimpong, right?
Then also, it's not just what you do with the ball, how you get the ball to Wirtz, it's how do you defend, like how do you play out of possession? So you've got Salah is not going to defend an awful lot, it's not what he wants to do. You've got Wirtz who does do it, but is maybe lacking some physicality, so you want people behind him who are a bit busier. So obviously, Gravenberch is the link between defence and midfield, really. You've got to play Szoboszlai somehow, because he's going to be the one that helps cover for everything over here. But then you put in someone like, who's the other person that goes in? Maybe like Jones or McAllister goes in.
Not McAllister, perhaps McAllister, yeah.
So the team sort of makes sense like this, but then that is Wirtz playing off the left as a left winger, which is not what you want. And there's like knock-on problems that come from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got the makings of like a potential structure here, right? Actually, against Inter, we saw Liverpool playing in a 4-4-2 diamond, which I think solves a lot of the structural issues that you have here. The issue for me with Wirtz is if you're going to play him with a fullback on the left, we talked about Grimaldo. Grimaldo is a very different type of player to Kerkez. Obviously, if Wirtz is coming inside, you want someone who can have coverage there, but Kerkez is just a much more high-intensity player. And I think part of the reason why Leverkusen worked so well was because you had a guy who could come inside and have Wirtz go out wide if he wanted to and still be able to operate in a controlled way between the lines. I don't think you're going to get that with Kerkez. But if you're going to try and mirror what he did at Leverkusen, which I don't think that he would necessarily do. At Leverkusen, they had 2 10s between the lines, and I don't think Liverpool have another creative player like Wirtz. But I think the 4-4-2 diamond works quite nicely, just in so much as you can use Wirtz as the sole 10.
Would you have him as a 10 behind it rather than... Because he came on and played as part of the 2 up top.
I guess the way that I would instinctively think about this is you've got to get, if you get Wirtz in, you can then get Salah, Isak. And if you can find a system where you can play some kind of rotation between these 3 and these 2 positions with Wirtz behind them, you can eventually start moving Salah out, which is what they're seemingly trying to do. While still playing a kind of functional system. And both Salah, Isak can play wider, so if you did want to use a system with like quite wide forwards, Ekitike's always drifting out to the left as well. So for me, this sort of kind of platforms all of them. Like you say, the big question is how do you deal with it from an out possession point of view, right? But I guess if you're playing Salah in the front line, then Wirtz is fine out of possession, I think, as a potential 10, especially then if you're sticking him alongside someone like Szoboszlai, who can do a bit of the work here, cover for the spaces that Salah's maybe leaving open.
Have we got a bit of a problem? Who's our focal point then? Or do they not need a focal point up front?
Yeah, I guess you would run Ekitike, Isak maybe as a rotation with those two strikers, right? Gotcha. The other thing I would do is probably introduce Jones. I'm just so impressed with Curtis Jones this season in terms of being able to play a bit more tempo stuff, because what we haven't talked about here is like the overall strategy, because with Slot, we've spent the whole of the last few seasons talking about how he likes to possess the ball deep and have these trigger changes where they go on these really devastating attacks. Part of the problem that Liverpool have had this season is that teams are allowing them to do that less. Whereas what we've seen with Alonso from his time at Leverkusen, his instinct is to possess the ball deep, move it forward, force the opponent into a block, and then sit, as we saw before, with trying to create space between the lines, with the ability for someone like Wirtz. And I guess someone like Szoboszlai potentially could drift into that space as well, and then start finding ways of being able to bring these two into play from within, I guess, a more patient possession game, but through finding these gaps in the middle as well. So, I don't know, something like this I think works, mainly because Liverpool don't really have the ability to offer width outside of the fullbacks right now, it feels like. This is a way of like getting Wirtz into those central places. It's a way of bringing in both strikers. I think the midfield works. So yeah, I mean, I think this would be a way of playing that would probably platform Wirtz better than what Liverpool are doing right now.
I would also say, like, what's interesting about Liverpool, and if we look at the current Real Madrid squad, is that like you've got great players, but a lot of great players who probably don't feel as confident in their ability to make whatever system they're playing in work either.
If you look at what Ancelotti ended up doing last season, and not far off what Alonso's doing at times, is they fall into a 4-4-2 blocks, because you've got Vinicius Junior and Mbappe. This is the kind of the way they do it. So they defend like this, and as we have shown already, they don't put any pressure on anyone. Right. So, but this is the thing, if you've got a player like Salah does do an awful lot, if you have them in the two as a block, then all you have to do is make sure you block the pass through so it goes wide and other players can deal with it there. But Real Madrid, you have Bellingham playing between these two. So they both end up in the wide areas and Bellingham would go through the middle. That's kind of what you end up with. So you've got this different, they end up with a diamond as well at times. And Tchouaméni has been the one who would drop between the back, because we know that Alonso would often have this sort of thing with a 3, so you can push on your wide players. He's not had the right backs really available. So you end up with like Asensio playing at right back, but he's really a centre back, so he ends up coming across, so you get the back 3. And then Carreras, who would play left back, also plays a lot of left centre backs. You put Fran Garcia ahead of him, so he's playing 2 positions at the same time as well. Then you get Bellingham into these spaces where you kind of want Bellingham to be, because he's a bit like a very different profile player to Wirtz, but it's not insane to say it's a similar sort of thing.
It's about platforming, isn't it? Like Bellingham's a really good box crasher, right? So if you can get him in situations where he's near the box and can arrive, then you're getting more out of him, right? Not every 10 has to play the same way.
The same way, yeah.
Exactly, but then you want to get Mbappe to be able to move, and you want Vinicius Junior to be able to move as well, but you can't make them move wherever they want, because as we see, then the rest of the defence falls apart, so you need to make sure they're in certain places. It's why like players like Valverde have been so important, because he's up and down and does everything that you want him to do off of the ball. A bit like Szoboszlai really at Liverpool. Alonso is putting a lot of his ideas into Real Madrid, but if they're trying to press and do the things they're meant to do, and then they don't put the pressure on, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Because then what happens is so often that the chances they create are just what we've seen in the past from Real Madrid. You've got Vinicius Junior who has a motor under his boot. But the best way to do it, draw them out, let them come and press you, put the ball over the top, and you get someone like Mbappe in. Alonso is introducing new ways of playing and a new way of trying to press with players like John has said, where it's very hard to coach that, let alone like the fitness levels first of all. It's really hard to get that in straight away. Then to get the buy-in. And then when you have players like Vinicius Junior who don't understand why they've been taken off to solidify a lead, you start having egos fall apart, and then the team morale drops, and then that's a different part of management. And this is sort of what Slot's had, right? Now he's having to deal with Salah, who's fallen out with them all. Maybe that will be resolved, whatever, but the same sort of issues. Like, how do you defend with Salah in that block? How do you do it? How do you get them pressure? How do you get Szoboszlai to be able to do the pressure, but also be the one defending behind when you've got Wirtz, so you want to be part of the pressure, but also in behind? There's a lot of things, a lot of moving pieces here.
What we're talking about really is that you get these managers coming in like your Pep Guardiolas and your Alonsos, where what they want to do is they're going to say, yeah, we've got some great players on the team, and they can solve problems individually. We don't really need tactics. When we say tactics, we usually mean those kind of structural ideas. I guess the trade-off is that these managers realise that if they can control games better, in theory, they should be more sustainably able to win. They don't want to just leave it up to chance, right? And it goes both ways, right? You can control a game but then still lose. And if you do that, I guess you look at the players you have available to you and you say, well, why didn't we get the most out of Mbappe? Why weren't we just shelling the ball over the top to him? Because he can score that more often than most players, right? So we could lean into that. It's always a balance, I think, between trying to use structural ideas in order to impose enough control for you to get what you want out of the game, but also not wanting to impose so much structure that you feel as though it's having a negative impact on the good players that you have.
So should Real Madrid just let Alonso cook, let him do his thing, or should you just go to Liverpool?
I don't know.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.